I'm talking about nature now, because that's been a reoccurring theme, and there's definitely a paradox when we talk about nature, because what we think about when we talk about nature is the forests and trees and animals, but behind that, the meaning of nature, almost what that signifies is this thing that's untouched by humanity, or something that's pure, unadulterated, that exists independent from us, which is a paradox in a lot of ways, and one which is that simply we can't perceive something apart from us. Also, we're a part of nature as anything else, so to think that somehow we're separate from nature is just really strange. We live in a time where that type of nature that we imagine, the pure, unadulterated nature, doesn't exist. I don't know if unadulterated is the best word to be using for this. It doesn't exist. There was a podcast, Radio Lab, that talked about the black rhino, and that the black rhino would have gone extinct a long time ago, except for the fact that people are willing to spend $30,000 to hunt the black rhino. And because they're willing to spend that money, people are willing to preserve not only the black rhino, but the black rhino's environment, because if it wasn't for that, then the environment would have been destroyed and they would have gone extinct. So many hunting lodges are actually preserving nature and the animals. Therefore, nature is only existing as a commodity, still in the same way as if somebody were to just chop down the whole forest. So, almost all, I suppose there's probably parts of nature that have been untouched by man, maybe in this world, but almost all of nature, and certainly all the nature that we have access to, is in fact administered over by people. So all of the, right, because, we can go to state parks. That's usually where we get our fill of nature, and state parks are funded, etc., etc. If it wasn't for that funding, if it wasn't for the money, they wouldn't be there. So even when we are out hiking, camping, rock climbing in the middle of the wilderness, it's still very much a product of human culture. That idea of nature just simply doesn't exist anymore, and maybe it didn't ever exist, because also this idea is it's a very romantic idea of nature that actually has origins in the Romantic era, in the 1800s, right before that, and in Western culture too. In the Romantic era, this idea of nature is pure, and the same way that we view it now came about before that. That value wasn't there, that image wasn't there. So when nature actually existed, it wasn't conceived of in the way it's conceived of now, and it doesn't exist. Right? It's almost like talking about God or something, right? Something that you can't really understand. It's kind of strange. And it's resurfaced a lot in postmodernism, I think. I'm going to say that. But then what is nature, right? We can't hold that same definition of nature that we had, because it's a faulty definition. And I think looking at our environment, right, that in fact we are very much animals, and act like animals, and do the same thing that animals do. We're just more self-aware, we're more neurotic. We have values, right? We're capable of putting a value to things which animals don't, like making $1 billion, which would, require the destruction of nature, alright, subjugation of people. So, but if animals valued that, they would do it. They just don't, right? Maybe they don't have values, I don't know. So, I think if you look at our environment, which are cities, I come from a city, and most people do, right, because that's where the high populations are. Coming from a city, you can't understand nature. Even if you could get into it, you wouldn't be able to understand it, I think. But also, it sort of is our nature in a lot of ways, because it's our environment, it's what we adapt to. It's what we utilize to survive, in the same way an animal utilizes their environment to survive. What we perceive is what we use to survive. And like the internet, which many would consider to be the least real of everything, right? Because you have the real world and the internet, which is just information, right, and images on a screen, etc., etc. But if you're interacting with more people on the internet, than off the internet. If you're doing more things if more of your reality is on the internet, you're paying bills on the internet, you're going to school on the internet, you're interacting with people, emailing coworkers, etc., doing your work on the internet, then the internet is in fact more real than not, than off the internet. Why do people put so much effort into presenting themselves a certain way in social media when it's fake? It's not fake, it's real. That's why. At least it's not, any more fake or real than anything else. And I think it's also an environment that we have to adapt to, because there's lots of issues, especially in, the first generation that grew up with internet. There's a lot of problems of emotional issues that come from social media. And I think if you were born at a time where you grew up with social media, it was always there, then that's as uncontrollable as growing up in a forest. And there's different values in parenting as far as when children should or should not have access to the internet, social media, etc. But nonetheless, it's there and it's accessible, and so you have these kids who are growing up with social media, and that's what they know. It's as real as anything else to them, and then they're not adapted to it, right? Or people who get on it later aren't adapted to it, and all these emotional problems, all these issues come up. I think give it a couple generations, we will physiologically evolve and adapt to the internet, although it may change by then. And it's the same with attention spans, which, that's been decreasing since, television, video games. The attention spans have been going down, and you can look at that as a bad thing, right, because we're going to lose the novel, which is going to, make everybody sad who loves the novel, and yet you're going to have people who grow up who don't care at all for that because of their attention span. They're part of the post-literate generation, and new forms of communication, new forms of information, new forms of art, etc. will all rise from that. So it's hard to say whether it's a bad thing or a good thing. There's certainly things that are lost and things that are gained, people who are lost, people who are gained, and it's movement, it's evolution, and the same way that nature functions. I think a lot of the tragedy that revolves around the loss of nature is emotional and sentimental, and is marketable. It's the same thing. It's the same attitudes that are destroying nature is what's crying about, And I'm not trying to say that it doesn't matter that we're destroying the environment. There are obvious environmental issues, but I trust humanity's ability to survive very well. We're kind of like cockroaches, and that. So many of these environmental issues seem inevitable, so if they are inevitable, the question is, how are we going to deal with them when they inevitably happen? And humanity, nature will spread on. Even if all life on the planet were to die, nature would still spread. I guess it'd be hard to conceive of all life dying. If there were some bacteria left alive, then nature's as good as anything else, because the nature that we have is contingent, right? So do with that what you will. See you guys.